Hi everyone, thank you very much for coming to the fourth in the series of Armadale Public Lectures. And once again, I'd like to thank Claire in the back there for helping organising this. She's been absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate all the efforts, Claire. And this is the last one for the year, and we hope to reconvene next year. But thank you very much, Claire. I think we should all give Claire a round of applause before we start. Okay, tonight's lecture is on the CCC, the Crime and Corruption Commission, the good, the bad and the ugly. Now, West Australia, like the rest of Australia, has participated in a surge of interest in anti-corruption agencies around the world over the past quarter century. In West Australia, the Corruption and Crime Commission, commonly referred to as the CCC, began operations in 2004, being the product of over a decade of experience with some form of anti-corruption agency in the state and of informed debate about the rationale for such a body, its desired functions and powers, and how it fitted within a liberal democratic society. The CCC has been a controversial body. It possesses great powers and operates with substantial autonomy. There's been many complaints about the CCC, particularly from journalists, members of the legal professions and some parliamentarians. In this lecture tonight, I will cover the following. 1, the history of the CCC. 2, the purpose, function and structure of the CCC. 3, the powers of the CCC. And fourthly, accountability of the CCC. And I also will delve into some specific issues that have created headlines and or controversy for the CCC and all relevant parties or individuals. Let's start off with the history. West Australia's original anti-corruption body was the Official Corruption Commission, established in 1988, which had a name change in 1996 to the Anti-Corruption Commission. The main function of the ACC was to ensure that complaints of misconduct by public officers were appropriately investigated or otherwise resolved. But while the ACC could conduct preliminary inquiries into complaints of corruption, it lacked coercive investigative powers. In 2002, the Kennedy Royal Commission into Police Corruption in West Australia recommended the establishment of a new permanent body with broader investigative powers. This led to the establishment of the CCC in January 2004. When introducing the Corruption and Crime Commission Bill in 2003 to establish the CCC, the then Attorney General, the Honourable Jim McGuinty, said, and I quote, "Western Australians deserve a police service and public sector that are free from the scourge of corruption. To achieve this objective, the state government has taken and will continue to take all necessary measures, including the enactment of new legislation, to restore the community's confidence in the integrity and honesty of those who serve the public. Therefore, this bill continues and strengthens the government's achievement in tackling crime and corruption. It will do so by providing Western Australia with one of the most powerful crime and corruption fighting bodies in Australia. The Corruption and Crime Commission will be able to investigate West Australian judges, ministers, members of public, police officers and other public officials." In referring to the Royal Commission into the police, McGuinty noted, "The constant stream of allegations or admissions of assaults, perjury, theft and bribery has caused even the most cynical to agree that previous efforts to combat police corruption in this state has been ineffective. In an interim report delivered in December 2002, Royal Commissioner Geoffrey Kennedy, AOQC, indicated that it has been possible at an early stage to conclude that the identifiable flaws in the structure and powers of the ACC have brought about such a lack of public confidence in the current processes for the investigation of corrupt and criminal conduct that the establishment of a new permanent body is necessary." Let's move on to the purposes, functions and structure of the CCC. The CCC has two main purposes. 1 is to combat and reduce the instances of organised crime, and secondly, to improve the integrity of and reduce the incidence of misconduct in the public sector. Now, the functions of the CCC can be grouped into three main areas. One, the misconduct function. This function involves the assessment of notifications and allegations received from public sector agencies and the public relating to public sector misconduct, the monitoring and review of misconduct investigations undertaken by public sector agencies, and the investigation of serious misconduct by the Commission's Investigations Unit. The prevention and education function. This function is supposed to work through cooperation between the CCC, the public sector and local government authorities, and with other oversight bodies. The focus is to provide educational programs to raise the awareness among public sector agencies about their responsibilities for reporting suspected corruption and misconduct, assisting them in dealing with suspected misconduct, and advising them on building corruption resistance. And the third function is the organised crime function. The CCC does not investigate organised crime in its own right. Rather, the organised crime function relies on the Commission of Police applying to the Commission seeking the use of exceptional powers contained in the Act. The CCC performs a gatekeeper role in response to such requests from the police, facilitating the use of these exceptional powers for organised crime investigations. I should note that Premier Colin Barnett has for some time held the view that the CCC should play a greater role in fighting organised crime in the state. Before the 2013 election, the Barnett government introduced a bill empowering the CCC to investigate directly organised crime. Now, superficially, it appears appealing to allow the CCC to take on more directly the fight against organised crime, but it does have problems. The Premier did not proceed with the legislation as there was opposition on his own side of politics as well as from the Labor opposition, and I should add the Parliamentary Joint Standing Committee on the CCC. The CCC Joint Standing Committee, in a report tabled in Parliament on the 30th of September 2011, said that the Corruption Commission was served well by its powers to investigate West Australian police and other civil servants. Liberal MLC Nick Goran, the chair of the committee, said, "It is clear that the CCC plays a vital role not only in investigating allegations of misconduct, but indeed in preventing misconduct from occurring in the first place." The committee took the view that given the historical link between organised crime and police corruption, the fight against organised crime was best served by the CCC in monitoring the West Australian Police for corruption. Now, the obvious problem with having the CCC directly involved in investigating organised crime is that it raises the issue of conflict. The CCC are in effect the last overseer of police behaviour. Now, if the CCC is working more directly in fighting organised crime, there will in effect be competing police-type forces, one being the WA Police and one being the CCC Anti-Organised Crime Fighting Unit. Plus, it may make it more difficult for the CCC to investigate complaints against the police if they are at the same time involved in joint operations with the police. And there's also the issue of competing for limited resources. I should add, though, that I agree with the Premier that the CCC should not be involved with minor-type misconduct from the public service. That is not saying that such conduct should not be dealt with, but I believe it is best to leave the CCC to deal with more serious allegations of crime and corruption within the public service. To this effect, more minor complaints of misconduct in the public service is now dealt with by the Public Sector Commission rather than the CCC. The structure of the CCC involves one commissioner, possibly acting commissioners if the commissioner is not available, an executive director and directors of operations, legal services, business services and corruption prevention, education and research. The commissioner has to be a person who has served as or be qualified for the appointment as a judge of the Supreme Court of West Australia or the equivalent courts of other Australian jurisdictions. But if an appointee is the holder of judicial office, there is a requirement that that person retire from that office upon taking up the position of commissioner. So most commissioners have been retired judges, or were judges who retired in order to take up the position. Now referring to the powers of the CCC. When investigating serious misconduct, the CCC has access to special powers, including power to obtain statements and information from a public authority or officer, power to obtain documents and other things, power to summons witnesses to attend and produce things, power to enter and search public premises, execution of search warrants, authority to conduct private and public hearings, authority to conduct controlled operations, authority to conduct integrity testing programs. And it should also be noted that you don't have the right to remain silent in the CCC hearing, as you do in a normal criminal court proceeding. With regards to its organised crime function, the CCC authorises and monitors the WA Police use of the exceptional powers available under the CCC Act. These exceptional powers include examining witnesses before the Commission, enhanced entry, search and related powers, the use of assumed identities and the conduct of controlled operations. In relation to hearings, there are some key differences between the hearing process in a commission hearing and a trial before a court of law. For example, a hearing is not usually open to the public unless the benefits of public exposure and public awareness outweigh the potential for prejudice or privacy infringements. Although a witness may be legally represented when appearing at a hearing, if there is a risk that representation of several witnesses by the same lawyer may prejudice the investigation, that representation will not be permitted. The rules of procedural fairness do not impose any obligation upon the CCC to notify any person that evidence may be given that is adverse to their interests before that evidence is actually given. The CCC is not bound by the rules of evidence and can exercise its functions with as little formality and technicality as possible. It will conduct its hearings with as little emphasis on the adversarial approach as possible. Although, may I say, many of the hearings in the CCC are very adversarial. No person appearing before a hearing of the CCC has a case to pursue. An inquiry is taking place for the benefit of which a person may have information to give or submissions to make. Representation does not often entail a right on the part of a legal practitioner to examine his or her client's witness or any other witness. Whether such examination is permitted and when it will occur are matters to be determined by the Commission, subject to the variable requirements of procedural fairness. So, in other words, a legal practitioner doesn't have a right necessarily to examine their own witnesses. They can represent that witness if allowed, but not necessarily having the right to examine that witness or any other witness. It is a contempt of the Commission for a person who has been summoned to appear and give evidence at the Commission hearing to fail to appear without reasonable excuse or to fail to answer a question without reasonable excuse. Now, I have criticisms of the way hearings have sometimes been conducted in what I would clumsily call perjury entrapment. An example comes from the now infamous Smith's Beach affair, which concerned funding irregularities in the Busselton Shire Council election and involved, among others, lobbyist and former Premier Brian Burke and former Minister in the Carpenter government, Norm Marlborough. But let's go back a bit. Sometime after Norm Marlborough had become a minister in 2006, his friend Brian Burke gave Marlborough a dedicated mobile phone that Burke insisted be their little secret. By then, unknown to either man, the CCC had started taping all Burke's phone conversation and was listening in. In one tape conversation, Bert said to Norm Marlborough, "You don't need anyone else to know you've got the phone, mate." Marlborough, "Yep." Bert, "Promise me." Marlborough, "Absolutely, done deal." Bert, "It's in your own interest, Norm." Marlborough, "Yep." Bert, "You just keep the number and I'll ring you when I need to get you, and you can ignore it or you can turn it off, whatever you like. But the main thing is you don't tell anyone else the number. If they see you with two phones, you just say, 'Oh, I just got this. This is Rose.'" Rose being Norm Marlborough's wife. In another conversation on the secret phone, Burke was recorded imploring Norm to use his powers as minister to give a key planning job to Beryl Morgan, a woman thought likely to favour Bert's developer client. Bert, "Mate, the other thing is you're not going to let me down on Beryl, are you?" Marlborough, No, who's Beryl? The girl, Busselton." Bert, "Yeah." Marlborough, "No, of course I'm not." Marlborough, "Burke, if I can't be seen, but mate, she's an effing good appointment." Marlborough, No. Burke, "This is the first person I've ever recommended to you for an appointment anywhere." Marlborough, "Yeah, oh mate, it's a done deal." Burke, Mate. Mate's a very good word in the Labor Party. Mate. It is just, believe me, it's just so important on about 15 different fronts. This conversation landed Burke with a $25,000 fine because he denied on oath to the CCC that he had asked Marlborough to appoint her. Before the CCC, he said, "I wouldn't have done that because I would not have thought that was the right thing to do." Marlborough was also found guilty of lying to the CCC and fined $12,000. He was forced to resign from Cabinet and soon resigned from Parliament. Now, I want to make it clear that I believe that Marlborough and Burt did the wrong thing. But I do want to query the line of questioning by the CCC. For example, before questioning Marlborough, the CCC had in possession telephone conversations between Marlborough and Burke. They knew what had been said between the two. They knew they were being in contact. But they questioned Marlborough on whether he had discussions with Burke over XYZ, where they very well knew, as a result of the telephone recordings, what conversations had been had. Marlborough denied he had been having conversations with Burke. He obviously panicked. He lied to the CCC. That can't be condoned. But could not the CCC have asked, "We have recordings of a telephone conversation you had with Brian Burt. And they could have then played it. What do you say to that?" or words to that effect? Why was there a need to ask Marlborough something they had the answer already to? They knew he had been speaking to Burt, so why did they need to ask him if he had been speaking to Burt? Was it to ensure that whatever else happened in the hearing, at least they could charge Marlborough with lying to the CCC? To make sure that the CCC could at least lay one charge from their expensive investigation into the Smith Beach affair? Now, of course, Marlborough should not have lied to the CCC, but my point is that the CCC should not deliberately set up the situation that increases the chances of lying. I know that might sound silly, but my basic point is that the CCC should not do things that I consider to entrap people into perjury. Perjury, of course, is something that is a crime and goes against our justice system. But I don't think you should be setting up a system or a line of questioning that increases that chances when you already have the information before you. They should have been asking Norm Marlborough, why did you have this conversation? What was meant by this conversation after playing the conversation to him? Now, but what they did was not beyond what they're allowed to do within the powers of the CCC. But that's one of the points that maybe needs to be looked at. Now, the CCC investigation into the Smith Beach affair did not result in many convictions. In fact, many of the charges flowing from the Smith Beach affair was thrown out of court in a 2010 Supreme Court decision. This was ably summarised in an ABC Online report as follows. The Corruption and Crime Commission spent 4 years, thousands of labour hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars pursuing a case which was thrown out of the Supreme Court in days. Justice Michael Murray dismissed all charges in that case against 3 men before they even begun their defence. He said there was not enough evidence to establish beyond reasonable doubt that they had acted corruptly. For former public servant Nathan Honduras and lobbyist Brian Burt and Gillian Gruel, that was good news. It wasn't for the CCC. It's also a bittersweet victory for Mr Honduras, who not only lost his job, but says he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to defend the CCC charges. At the moment, I'm looking at a very conservative estimate of losing $750,000. If you look at the amount of money I owe, I will spend the rest of my life paying it back. Despite his name being cleared, Mr Honduras says he doubts he'll ever get a job in the public sector again. Another senior public servant, Mike Allen, says his reputation was shredded by the CCC charges, which were ultimately never proven and of which he was eventually acquitted. Both men say their lives were derailed through allegations made in CCC public hearings, which were then thrown out in a court of law. That aspect of the state's corruption watchdog is drawing criticism, but so too is its conviction record. For Shadow Attorney General John Quigley, the CCC has one fatal flaw. It prosecutes the cases it investigates. He stated, "It's these merging of these powers which led to this trouble. The prosecution function and the decision to lay charges should be made by the Director of Public Prosecutions, not the CCC," he said. Mr Quigley says the DPP could objectively and independently review the CCC's investigations and determine whether it indeed had a case. In this case, they resoundingly failed in their prosecution. They should never have started the prosecution. The CCC collected its first scalp from its investigation into lobbyist Brian Berg and Julian Gruel when Norm Marlborough was found guilty of lying to the CCC while he was a Labor minister. But there is a string of public servants like Mr Honduras and Mr Allen, whose name and reputations have been tarnished because they have been publicly investigated by the corruption watchdog. The CCC's former public inspector, Malcolm McCusker, believes this could be combated by holding more hearings in private. He said, "The important point in the Act is that there shall not be public examinations unless the public interest dictates. It is clearly, at least in my view, in the public interest to ensure that members of the public, individuals, are not unnecessarily damaged." End of that ABC online report. The issue of whether the CCC should be laying charges is, for that matter, has the power to prosecute people it has investigated, was recently tested in a Supreme Court of WA hearing from an appeal of a former Broome-based police officer charged with assault. In a judgment on the 15th of July 2016, the Court of Appeal of the Supreme Court of Western Australia ruled the Crime and Corruption Commission was not authorised to commence the prosecutions under its governing laws. The former police officer, whose identity is suppressed, was charged after a CCC inquiry 3 years ago into 2 separate assaults on detainees in March and April 2013. The incidents were recorded by security cameras, and it is alleged on the first occasion the officer dragged an 18-year-old man through the police station by the neck. It was further alleged that 3 weeks later, after a detainee punched him on the nose, the officer responded by punching the detainee several times and kneeing him as he laid on the floor. The man, who later resigned from the police service, was charged by the CCC but commenced legal action challenging its right to prosecute him. In a unanimous decision, the Court of Appeal ruled the proceedings against the former officer must be quashed because, according to the legislation, the CCC's functions do not include the prosecution of offences. Chief Justice Wayne Martin said the terms of the legislation allowed only for the CCC to refer evidence assembled in the course of its investigations to another independent agency. He also said, if it had been the intention of the legislature, i.e. Parliament, that the Commission itself undertakes such prosecutions, specific reference to that function would have been expected in the Act. The omission of any such reference tells strongly against the proposition that the Commission's functions extend to and include the prosecution of offences the subject of investigations conducted by it. While the prosecution against the officer was quashed, the Chief Justice said, obviously there were other agencies, most notably the police, who would have the authority to commence proceedings. Whether or not such agencies commence proceedings against the applicant will be a matter for them to decide, he said. The significance of the decision cannot be underestimated. As Paul Murray wrote in an opinion piece in the West Australia, which I quote at length here, the decision has major ramifications for the CCC. Murray writes, in the long pursuit of former Premier Brian Burke by the CCC, only one conviction has survived his legal challenges. That was a prosecution launched by the Commission in 2009 for giving misleading evidence to a hearing as part of its Smith speech inquiry, which I went through. Murray then writes, last Friday's judgment by the WA Court of Appeal that the CCC has no authority to commence prosecutions of its own bat leaves the Burke conviction and at least 80 others invalid at worst and in legal limbo at best. The unanimous judgment has answered some long-standing questions over the agency's expansive activities. The Carpenter Labor government took no action when the 2008 Archer Review suggested it should amend the CCC Act to make it clear the agency has and has always had the power to commence and conduct prosecutions in the Magistrates' Court. In 2010, under former Commissioner Lee Robert Smith, the CCC insisted to a parliamentary inquiry it had the power to prosecute, while others wanted it clarified. Having failed to act twice, the government now has a moral dilemma and a huge legal problem in fixing the CCC's unlawful actions retrospectively. The judgment has left John McKechnie, who became Commissioner last year and oversaw the CCC's response to this case, holding another mess. He admitted last December it would take years to restore the CCC's reputation after its covert operations unit was found to have engaged in serious and systemic corruption. Things just got a lot worse. Chief Justice Wayne Martin noted in his judgment that the CCC Act makes no reference to the Commission prosecuting offences it investigated for misconduct. The omission of any reference tells strongly against the proposition that the Commission's functions extend to and include the prosecution of offences, the subject of investigations conducted by it, but which have no other connection with the Commission or administration of the Act, Justice Martin said. He was far less diplomatic about arguments put by the CCC counsel, Peter Quinlan, over 4 days earlier this year, that the prosecution powers were inferred in the Act. Justice Martin dismissed them as a valiant attempt to counter the obvious implication arising from the omission of any reference to the Commission's taking prosecution action, and a courageous attempt to avoid the obvious conclusion to be drawn from the sections of the Act. On another matter, he offered this analysis. With the greatest of respect to senior counsel, this submission owes more to optimistic imagination than it does to rational analysis. Mr. Quinlan has since been appointed as the State Solicitor General and will now have the role in cleaning up this legal nightmare. In a final blow, Justice Martin noted no similar body within Australia has prosecuting powers, so why should the CCC get them now retrospectively? Covering the invalidity of these prosecutions by giving the CCC a power it was never meant to have would be a travesty of justice. The CCC has transferred a series of prosecutions it was preparing to the Director of Public Prosecutions and will not return to the practice. That should end the damaging perception that CCC could launch a prosecution against one of its queries rather than some other agency doing so. The simple act of launching a prosecution can financially ruin a CCC target, which in itself is a coercive power that requires separation from the investigative arm. There's also a long line of legal failures where the DPP has been questionably convinced to take on hopeless CCC cases that it later dropped or which were eventually thrown out of court. This appeal judgment not only exposes a powerful government agency acting unlawfully, but suggests one previously keen to expand its horizons beyond what the Parliament intended. For a body already with awesome powers to compel people to give evidence without the usual legal protections, this is very dangerous. That being the end of Paul Murray's article. Under the enabling legislation establishing the CCC, Parliament never gave it the authority to initiate charges or to prosecute charges. And it would not be right, according to the rule of law principles, that Parliament give the CCC that power retrospectively to fix previous convictions that may now be susceptible to challenge as a result of the July Supreme Court decision. Although at times Parliaments have introduced laws having retrospective application, in general, laws should not retrospectively change legal rights and obligations. And what of the future? Should the CCC be given powers moving forward to lay and prosecute people they investigate? Considering the strong coercive powers that are vested with the CCC, Parliament should tread very carefully before seeking to give the CCC such powers. And remember, the CCC has a vested interest in the outcomes of the investigations it is involved with. Surely that alone should warrant concern with allowing them to lay their own charges and prosecute those charges. One must be careful, as people's reputations and livelihoods can be ruined just by the laying of charges without guilt being proven. Now moving on to accountability. The CCC is held responsible to the people of West Australia through the Parliamentary Joint Standing Committee on the CCC and through the Parliamentary Inspector. The Parliamentary Inspector is responsible for investigating complaints against the Commission or its officers and reports to the Parliamentary Inspector. Also, the CCC is subject to oversight from the Ombudsman in relation to compliance with the Telecommunications Interception Act and the Auditor General in relation to the Commission's financial statements. Tension can develop between the CCC and the Parliamentary Inspector. For example, in 2008, the CCC launched legal action against former Parliamentary Inspector Malcolm McCusker after he tabled a report in Parliament criticising the Commission's findings against the former Coburn Mayor Stephen Lee. The Commission accused Mr McCusker of overstepping his powers by releasing the report and asked the Supreme Court to clarify the relationship between the Commission and the Parliamentary Inspector. However, the CCC's Commissioner, Lee Robert Smith, decided to drop the case after a day-long closed meeting of the Parliamentary Committee, which oversees the corruption watchdog. Also at the meeting were McCusker and his replacement as Parliamentary Inspector, former Supreme Court Judge Christopher Statler. The Parliamentary Committee issued a statement saying the court action was dropped after everyone at the meeting agreed on a process to address the dispute over the powers of the Corruption and Crime Commission and the Parliamentary Inspector, which did not involve legal action. The integrity of the CCC was tested when in 2013 allegations were made against CCC officers allegedly using assumed identities to get multiple driver's licences and rack up demerit points. In a report tabled in Parliament in 2015, Parliamentary Inspector Michael Murray, who you would have previously heard was the judge of the Supreme Court, said, as part of his inquiry into allegations of misconduct by CCC's Operational Support Unit, he uncovered serious systemic and behavioural failings within the CCC. He found that CCC never did criminal history checks on any of his officers before asking the WA Police Commissioner to grant them special constable status. Murray's report revealed CCC officers from outside the OSU also having driver's licences under multiple names. Murray wrote that this systemic abuse of the assumed identity power resulted in a situation when OSU officers would have been driving commissioned vehicles without the legal right to do so. We are told that the CCC has now made appropriate changes to the ASU, now called the Investigation Support Services Unit, to ensure better accountability. I want to conclude by briefly looking at the CCC's dealings with complaints of excessive use of force by police. In a report by Parliamentary Inspector Chris Statler in 2011 on the issue, he wrote, "During the past year, I have twice expressed concern to the CCC arising out of the fact that serious complaints alleging the use of excessive force on the part of Western Australian police officers are not being independently investigated by it. The failure to persuade the CCC to independently investigate seemingly credible allegations concerning the use of excessive force leads to a loss of confidence in that body and in the system of justice. Because the option of taking private action in the court is prohibitively expensive for a large majority of persons affected, those persons are left without any remedy when dissatisfied with the outcome of an internal police investigation." Statler also said that I find it impossible to accept that the commencement of only one independent investigation in respect of 381 excessive force allegations reflects an appropriate balance. So there's 381 complaints of excessive use of force by the police, and the CCC only investigated one. And that was only because of the result of political pressure that they even investigated that one. But one of the allegations that the CCC failed to commence an independent investigation into relates to two friends of mine, Rob Cunningham and Catherine Atoms, who were tasered by police at Fremantle in the early hours of 2nd of November 2008. Rob Cunningham is a professor of law at UWA, or what UWA now Curtin, and Catherine is an environmentalist or a scientist. I don't have time to discuss in detail their story, and I made available the Parliamentary Inspector's report of the incident, which I'll give you at the end. But basically, what happened, so on the early hours of the 2nd of November 2008, Rob and Catherine were walking across the park near the Esplanade Hotel. Near the Esplanade, and this is on CCTV footage that I've seen that was played in court, three people walking down towards them, and they had obviously been drinking a bit too much, these three people, because they were a little bit wobbly. One of them falls into the flower bed or vegetation bed near the Esplanade Hotel where there's a little brick wall. It's not there now, but there was. Rob and Catherine see that happening. Rob leans over to pull the person up, but the person pulls him into the bush. In the meantime, two police officers come and they speak to Catherine and basically were asking for her name, and she said a few things to them, obviously, and then they said, "We'll give you, if you don't move on, we'll give you a moving on notice." And she said, "Well, I live in Fremantle in any case." By that time, Rob had not seen this happening and he had actually walked off. Then he turned around and he sees the two police officers with Catherine. He then walks back and points to the police officers and said, "What's going on her legal, I'm her lawyer," because he was a solicitor as well. In a quick time, both of them are grabbed and their hands are put behind their back, and then you see them being pushed onto the road and out of the vision of the CCTV footage. What then happened, a number of cop cars arrived and they were tasered. They were allegedly forced to the ground and they were tasered. Taken to the Armadale Police Station, they were questioned under the policy of using tasers. If anyone's been tasered, they're allowed to ask for medical treatment. Rob asked for medical treatment and was told in uncertain terms that he wasn't going to get it, etc., etc. Now, at a later date, there was someone at the hotel who had been filming this. At a later date, Rob's office at UWA was broken into and the hard drive in his computer was taken. Anyway, Rob and Catherine were charged with resisting arrest and I think obstructing justice. And their case was heard on the 29th of April 2010 in the Fremantle Magistrates Court. Now, I'll read part of the Parliamentary Inspector's report that I'll give you. So this relates to the actual court case in which Rob and Catherine had been charged with resisting arrest and obstructing the course of justice, I think. That may not have been the actual charge. And then they had to go to court. And this is what the Parliamentary Inspector is saying. After cross-examination of the first witness by the prosecution, that witness being one of the arresting officers, the police prosecutors suggested to Rob's legal representative that he make a no-case submission. This submission was made and accepted by the magistrate. The charges were dismissed and $15,000 were ordered in favour of Rob and Catherine. The magistrate was critical of the officer who gave evidence and stated that he was not satisfied that the officers involved in Rob's and Catherine's arrest acted appropriately or lawfully. In dismissing the charges, the magistrate said, "I found that the testimony given by the arresting officer was extremely evasive, it was imprecise, and his evidence lacked recollection and was extremely vague, and he was, in my view, unreliable and unconvincing during the course of his testimony. He constantly stated that he could not remember, he was fatigued, he admitted versions of his statement were inaccurate. He admitted that the summary of facts were inaccurate. He admitted that the actions of the sergeant who had tasered Rob and Catherine may have been inappropriate in relation to the use of a taser in the circumstances. He denied that there was collusion with his colleague regarding the formulation of statements made by both officers that were put to him. That was a most unconvincing explanation for the reason given in relation to the spelling error made in both statements, and also in relation to the terminology used as alleged by himself and in the statement of his colleague that it may not have been accurate. If there had been no collusion, how else could such an exact statement have been recalled by both him and his colleague?" And so, so the statement of both of the police officers had the same spelling mistake. There was clearly an attempt to minimise his role and also the other officer's role in the overall set of circumstances, and in all the circumstances, the CCTV speaks for itself. On the evidence, I am not satisfied that there is a case to answer. The officer acted appropriately and or lawfully. His evidence lacked such credibility and reliability that it should be totally rejected, and accordingly, I am not satisfied that Catherine acted in a manner that breached the peace initially. I'm not satisfied there was any lawful reason for any demand for her to give her name and address. There was no lawful reason as to why the other arresting officer should have grabbed her by the arm, because she did actually try to move away and he grabbed her arm and brought her back. I mean, and Rob and Catherine are very slim, slender people, so physically they're not imposing. And the magistrate stated, "I am not satisfied that she was notified as to why her name and address was required." There is no evidence to suggest that, having rejected the evidence of the arresting officer, that was the case, and accordingly, the actions taken by the officers after the intervention of Rob give rise to a conclusion that there is no case to answer concerning the lawfulness of their behaviour towards him after he intervened. Now, the Parliamentary Inspector said the incident involving Rob and Catherine warranted a thorough independent investigation by the CCC, and that did not happen. Rob pursued the issue with the Police Internal Investigation Unit. He then wrote to the CCC and they were not prepared to investigate it. The Parliamentary Inspector writes, "The CCC's decision not to conduct a full independent investigation in respect of the incident must be seen in light of the fact, mentioned by the magistrate, that the police officer who gave evidence at the trial had admitted that the actions of the sergeant who had tasered Rob and Catherine may have been inappropriate in relation to the use of a taser in that circumstance. This of itself was enough to warrant independent investigation." In concluding this lecture, I add only a few comments. Corruption is corrosive to the body politic, liberal democracy and a civic society. Thus, we must seek to stamp it out and hold those who engage in corruption accountable, and justice must be done and seen to be done. But when establishing anti-corruption fighting organisations, We must forever remain vigilant to ensure the organisation does what it should do, and no more. When it comes to the CCC, it seems we have some good accountability structures in place, particularly with the Parliamentary Inspector, but there's also a need to look at the governing legislation for the CCC and work out appropriate legislative and operational reforms to improve the workings of the CCC. Thank you. All right, questions?